The ocean. It can be serene, magical, angry, dangerous, and stunningly beautiful, all in the same week. It'll teach you life lessons if you're listening. For a group of kids growing up in a New Jersey beach town, the lessons of the surf would last forever. They were born in the mid-60s, when the counterculture was born. Vietnam was in swing, and incredible events shaped the world. Out in California, surfing had arrived from Hawaii, and it created not just a sport, but a lifestyle. The surfing craze moved east and landed squarely in New Jersey. And these babies of the 60s saw older brothers and local legends unlock the mysteries of the waves. Not always in the sun-kissed California style, but often in a more gritty New Jersey kind of way. Cold water, storm waves, and hard work. As kids in the 70s, they started in pools and at the ocean's low tide in the shallows. They got blue and yellow surf mats at Scion Arts and headed out a little further. They learned the power of the Atlantic waves even on the calm days when their mothers would let them out there. They joined swim teams, building stamina and getting comfortable with being underwater. Seabright in the 70s had a special culture. Wiseman's Candy Store, Dixie Bowser's Esso, where you got your bike tires fixed, the Oceanfront Bar, the Tripod, the three-legged dog, Mario the Barber, and Food Town, each with their own set of characters inside and on the sidewalks of Ocean Avenue. The town was still coming down from the glorious 1950s and had been knocked around by the 70s economy and some pretty bad storms. But like most of New Jersey, it was tough, and it was making the most of things.
A couple of 100 yards away from the ocean, so it didn't take long to just kind of get up in the morning, ride our bikes to Seabright, and spend the entire day just doing whatever we could find to do around the ocean. If there were waves, we were surfing. If there was wind, we were sailing. If there was neither, we were snorkeling and trying to stab crabs around the jetty and fishing from the beach. And I think about it all the time.
First memories I really have is belly boarding, on those belly boards, coming out with that vicious rash and wearing that stupid t-shirt and being in pain. But that's the first memory I really remember about the ocean in Seabright. And then learning to actually stand up on that belly board kind of led into surfing.
So when we were little in the 70s, it was just all about the beach. Every summer we'd go to the beach almost every day, and it was just all about the water and learning how to swim. And then the winter just was dead. You just waited for the summer, really.
By the mid-70s, these kids had entered the teen years. School, sports, and other activities kept them busy. But living near the beach, life was centered on the summer. By the late 70s, they had graduated to bodyboards, which were nothing more than molded styrofoam wrapped in nylon fabric made to look like half a surfboard. With these, they learned to carve and cut and emulate those older boys on fiberglass that hung around off the Ship Ahoy jetty and any of the other 7 breaks in Seabright. Each break, usually defined by the name of a beach club or former beach club, had a jetty, man's sad attempt to capture sand from the longshore current that takes its bite out of Seabright each winter. The jetties did their job for a few hundred yards, but it wasn't so great if your beach was north of one of them. High tide meant no sand. In 1977, everything changed for this group, who fell between baby boomers and Gen Xers. One of the local surf legends from the early days had come back to town after surfing the world's greatest breaks to open a surf shop. He called it Island Style.
Basically opened the shop in 77 and had, a dozen or 15 boards and, started to stock wetsuits and t-shirts and all the other stuff. This was really before the big surf guys came in.
Mostly remember getting wax and stickers. That's what, maybe that's why Durf put up with us so much. At least we were buying stuff.
I think he probably tolerated us hanging around the shop, even though we probably annoyed him pretty good sometimes, but he was a great sport about it.
Island Style opened, which is kind of right at the time when we were independent enough to just be on our own for the entire day. And Durf opened Island Style, and we'd come down there. And you read now, or you look at what little surf groms look like, and that was us. I'm sure that Durf, was trying to get a business off the ground, and we're, 4 of us are walking in with, maybe flip-flops on and bathing suits, and we had just gotten out of the water and going back and forth. So,
no, man, because everyone is a grom at some point, and everyone, including me, is like that. When Bill was around and he had the shop, and I was the kid hanging in the shop, and wanting to be part of all that. It's a rite of passage when you surf.
They saved up paper route and lawn mowing money to buy one of Durf's coveted boards. And over those next few years, they became a crew of full-time surf addicts. They'd surf all day, getting baked by the sun, and by dusk, their lungs were soggy, and bending down to take off the leash made seawater come out of their nose. The most memorable days were hurricanes and nor'easters, when real danger tested their mettle. During summer, their noses would peel, and in winter, they'd have ice in their hair, while their fingers turned to prunes. But it was nothing a frozen Charleston Chew candy bar couldn't fix. From that first warm day in the spring until the snow fell late in the fall, it was all about the ocean, and man, was it fun. During this period, there was one surfer in the group who stood out, and his name was Keith Buff. Keith was a superior athlete, and the balance and flexibility needed to master surfing and skateboarding came naturally to him. Even though he could outpace the others, and his confidence and good looks made him stand out, he was humble. He always found a way to help the younger guys get better, and his sense of humor and leadership qualities made him the alpha dog of this pack. Keith excelled at skateboarding at the local skate park, and eventually even had a half pipe in his driveway that was a rally point when there were no waves to surf on.
So he was that guy to me that just was good at everything, especially the skateboarding and the surfing aspect of it.
The best surfer out of the guys who surfed. He was the best skateboarder out of the guys who skated. When Durf open island style. I mean, Durf had his own little skate team that he quote unquote sponsored, so that probably meant he gave him a free skateboard. But Keith was the best skater. We'd see him over at the ramps when they built the paved wave down at Oakhurst. We'd see him down there.
At that time, we're like the punk kids. Nobody really wants. I just remember he was always a nice guy to us. You know, he was always kind of took you under your wing, kind of talked to you, explained stuff to you a little bit. You know,
he just had the look. He had blonde curly hair, and he just had the whole surfing vibe going. And he was a great guy to hang around. And I remember learning a lot watching him surf and just talking to him.
He always seemed like the elder out of our crew, and he was always I think he was always very supportive of the young guys who were trying to surf too. I remember specifically saying things to me while we were in the water that were encouraging and complimentary, especially if you had like just a tough day of getting your butt kicked or something.
As they progressed through high school, surfing continued to be a primary activity, although team sports and summer jobs often got in the way. Getting driver's licenses meant they could stop hitchhiking and visit other breaks like Sandy Hook, Long Branch, and beyond. After high school, the group scattered. Some going off to college, some staying in the area. Lives and careers took hold, marriages and families were started, and it became rare to find each other in the lineup.
Like a lot of things in life, you kind of move on. I left town, went away to college, and still surfed a little bit during college years, but kind of faded away from it. And then moved away for a while, did different things, and ended up coming back to live in the area. But by then I was raising a family and getting into my career, and kind of surfing just fell away, and I never really went back to it.
What happened to me was had kids fairly early and got into coaching almost year round. You stopped checking the waves, and next thing you know, I must have gone. It must have been a good 8 or 10 years that I hardly surfed. I mean, maybe I got in the water once or twice a year, and that wasn't a problem because I was busy doing things that were really important then, especially with my kids.
But no, still kept it up, not as seriously. Don't have a wetsuit. I surf a longboard.
Keith followed this path, going away to college, and then coming back to the area to take over his family's auto parts business. He got married in 1985 and bought a house not too far from the beach. His charisma and work ethic served him well in business. He invested wisely during a local real estate boom and built his auto parts company to support his growing family. Over the next 10 years, Keith and his wife added 3 children to the mix. Amanda in 1987, Lisa in 1990, and Keith Jr. in 1994. Like many of the old crew of surfers, Keith developed some new interests and turned his recreational focus to a new sport, golf. Once he chose to take on golf, Keith was all in. He joined a golf club, and despite some very serious golfers being there, he quickly improved and eventually became the club champion, beating others who had much deeper experience. Like his other endeavors, even though he outplayed those around him, he made friends and built support in the golfing world. In July of 1999, Keith was playing in another championship tournament. Just after he stepped off the course, something went horribly wrong. He suddenly collapsed and was totally unresponsive to efforts to revive him. He was rushed to a nearby hospital where doctors realized he had suffered some sort of major brain trauma. After some tests, it became apparent that Keith had suffered a catastrophic brain hemorrhage caused by a rare condition called an arterial venous malformation, or better known as an AVM. This tangling of blood vessels near his brainstem had likely been there since birth, but chose this day to burst with no warning. The prognosis for those who have this type of incident is not good. The vast majority do not survive the event, and if they do, they are often severely impaired for the rest of their days. Neurologist Dr. Bruce Rosenblum performed emergency surgery to relieve the pressure on his brain and remove the tangled and bleeding area, but the damage was done, and Keith's fight was far from over. He came through the initial surgery and was placed in a coma. But just 3 days later, the wound burst again, requiring another life-threatening surgery. Once again, Keith pulled through, only to develop a severe staph infection.
They didn't know if Keith was going to survive this. He was in the hospital. He was completely paralyzed. He was in a coma.
Over the next 6 weeks, Keith would need a skin graft to repair damage from the infection. He was on a feeding tube and ventilator, and he was in and out of a coma. Things were not looking good. His family and friends surrounded him, praying for a miracle. For many months, Keith endured a multitude of procedures and treatments trying to keep him alive. He endured a tracheotomy to aid in his breathing, and an abdominal feeding tube was installed. His injury and semi-conscious state caused him to combatively try and pull out all the equipment that was keeping him alive. There were more surgeries installing stents to prevent clotting, but over time, there were also slight improvements. Keith was more aware, and although he could not speak, his family got him an Etch-a-Sketch where he could spell out simple words. Keith was still in there, and his family, especially his mother Cynthia, never gave up hope. She worked tirelessly to find the best doctors and treatments and stayed with Keith throughout this period. His children, too young to be allowed to visit, started to fear the worst, and he was not able to comfort them in person. As his condition stabilized, Keith was moved to the Kessler Rehabilitation Center in West Orange, New Jersey, still with lines and catheters in place to help with medications and bodily functions. Even though he was showing progress, new problems constantly emerged. As he came back to consciousness, he had severe double vision, and the damage to his brain affected basic motor reflexes, like swallowing. His therapist tried to get him back on solid food. He ingested some into his lungs, causing yet another painful infection. His wife and mother, and often his children, would visit Keith each day, even though they lived nearly an hour away. For 6 months, this pattern repeated itself, but by Christmas of 1999, he was able to come home in a wheelchair, and he still required constant care. For the next 2 months, he continued therapy, this time at JFK Medical Center in Edison, New Jersey. There, they helped Keith relearn how to do basic functions, like dress, eat, and sit up. His wife, children, and mom, as well as brothers and sisters, all stayed close, many visiting each day. By the spring of 2000, Keith started to make some solid progress. He moved back home, into a first-floor bedroom, and took therapy at nearby Monmouth Medical Center. He started to work on speech, and by the summer, he was able to have the feeding tube removed and could eat food once again. Doctors and therapists started to share with Keith's family that they felt his progress was complete. They said he would not improve much more than the first year had produced. Still in a wheelchair and facing an uncertain future, Keith's marriage was no longer sustainable, and by the fall of 2000, he moved in with his parents. These were dark times, when the reality of losing his family, his businesses, his speech, mobility, and everything he cared about started to sink in. He could no longer provide for his children, and he had been stripped of all the dignity a man has within him. There were days when he wondered if he could go on. He thought it would be better if he were gone, rather than live out his time on earth in this condition. He fell asleep each night wondering if he would awaken. With tremendous support from his mother, Keith would not accept this fate. He would often think back to his time in the surf and the fear he'd overcome in big storms, the skill of staying calm when facing a giant wave, or dismissing the fear of a painful wipeout. Cynthia researched all kinds of treatments, and what they chose came from an unpredictable source: scuba diving. Divers who suffer from the bends are often given special oxygen treatments delivered in a highly pressurized environment called a hyperbaric chamber. For divers, it drives the nitrogen out of the blood, but for Keith, the treatment forced oxygen into the tiny areas of his brain that had been damaged, and this helped him heal. First in New York, and later in Florida, Keith subjected himself to over 30 treatment sessions, and additionally started taking magnesium injections to help with brain function. Comparative X-rays and scans showed that blood was flowing to areas of his brain that were thought to be permanently damaged, and amazing changes to Keith's condition started to appear. Keith was now able to stand, and additional physical therapy got him walking, slowly at first. His confusion and foggy state of mind started to clear, and his personality, and most notably his sense of humor, resurfaced. Living with his parents in Florida, Keith embarked on a demanding recovery campaign that included long trips to locations around the state for balance and speech therapy and weight training to strengthen his atrophied body. Back in New Jersey, his neurosurgeon, Dr. Rosenblum, was stunned by his progress. He broke all the rules. Most people would have given up, he said. But he still had concerns about the fragile nature of the original wound site now that Keith was exercising and more mobile. As the country tried to heal from the September 11th attacks, Keith underwent more procedures to ensure the original wound would not rupture again. His progress continued. After more than 2 years of intensive therapy, he was self-sufficient and could resume many normal activities, even the ability to ride a bike. He started to repair the connections with his children and friends, and his spirit returned in full.
I felt like I was in a bad dream, and basically I felt the bad dream would be over soon, but unfortunately it wasn't a dream, it was factual.
Today, Keith is an amazing example of beating the odds. He cares for himself, drives a car, even spends time at the golf course, coaching kids on playing the game. His 2010 book, Determination, was widely acclaimed, and you can often find him on podcasts and at public speaking events telling his incredible story of resilience and tenacity.
What I'm working on right now is another book in reference to golf, because my first book was more or less about my recovery, basically my life growing up. Yeah, I want to continue sharing my story because right now I'm on a motivational public speaking tour all over.
In the 21 years since that fateful day, Keith has dedicated himself to getting his old life back, one tiny step at a time.
The only thing I miss is there are certain sports such as surfing where I did try it. I was unable to get up, but as my condition improves, I'd love to at some point get back to doing that.
He swam against the tide and defied all the experts. His faith drove him to never give up, a phrase he thinks of often.
My interaction with people right now is either through publishing companies or more or less through therapists, which are helping me to get back to my regular lifestyle.
On certain days, you could find him at the beach, looking out to sea, remembering those carefree early years, surfing the waves the Atlantic offered up. You might think this is how the story will end. Don't be surprised if someday in the future you look out at the ocean and see a guy that looks a lot like Keith Buff carving up the waves.
Life's funny, you know, just when you think you got it, things can change in a heartbeat, you know. We're all blessed to be on this earth, and you got to enjoy every moment, you know, and it takes a true spirit to dig deep inside to get through that. And Keith did.